We're all in a miraculous journey from the moment we take our first breath to when we take our last. And every step is different, and we're evolving all the way, every day. I mean, think of before you fell in love, and then when you fell in love, and then after. And those are all different. Where you were trying to figure out whether to have a child or not, and then had a child, and then was a parent, and the child was getting out of hand. And then you might be getting out of hand. I mean, it just goes on, and then we don't expect someone younger than us to get sick, and then they do, or they have an accident, and our life is transformed again. It's all different. We're evolving every step, and, so as every religion. It's evolving, it's changing all the way along. The human way is one experience after another. Many Americans move often during their lives, from one school, workplace, neighborhood to another, or from one city, state, or country to another. The average American moves 12 times during their lives. I've moved 15 times so far in mine. When we move to a new place, we have new things to learn and often need to change what we do and even the way we think about things and other people. I've lived in other countries where I didn't speak the language at all, or I didn't speak it very well. And I missed a lot because I didn't understand much of what was said, and I constantly had to get help from others just to do everyday things. My first wife and the mother of our children grew up in India and was raised with a different religion, holidays, customs, and practices. We both often stumbled as we fell in love, married, pursued careers, and raised our children. On our first movie date, she was wearing sandals and a sari. A guy came by the aisle in combat boots. Instinctively, I put my hand down over her bare feet, and she screamed bloody murder, because you only touch the feet of like your grandparents when you're leaving them, or when you're leaving home, or your guru. And the whole audience thought he couldn't even wait until the lights went down. People who move from one country to another, like my first wife, Madhavi, are called immigrants. I suspect that each of you has friends, neighbors, colleagues, and helpers who are immigrants from another country. Many in Dallas do, because 18% of its residents are immigrants, and almost half of its children have at least one immigrant parent. A little more than half are from Mexico or other Central American nations. But the second largest immigrant group here is from India. And the other top 10 immigrant populations include Vietnamese, Chinese, Nigerians, Filipinos, Koreans, and Pakistanis. Many of them not only speak a different language, but have a different religion, holidays, customs, and family traditions. If we are really going to be friendly with them and understand them as they would like to be understood, we need to learn something about their religions. That is what I tried to do in this book that I worked on for 10 years in retirement and published recently. I hope that you will learn from different religions and what believe people do and what they do with their faith in other cultures. Because if we are going to succeed in the 21st century, we will need to understand one another and learn to work together using everyone's talents, wisdom, and experiences. I think religion is what people do with other people to try to understand what their lives are for, how to live together kindly, compassionately, and wisely. I think spirituality is what each of us does with our existential aloneness. For each of us continually needs to decide what and how to live our lives from moment to moment on our own. I've found that to do so wisely, I need to remember to find times to stop and refuse to be in a hurry, Breathe deeply and meditate and pray. Meditation has two sequential parts. First, clearing your mind, cleaning the clutter and monkey mind out of your consciousness so that you can then savor the second part of meditation, which is concentrating on one thing at a time until you can make sense of it, focusing on what is actually important in that moment. To do that, one needs to stop the external world from interfering with your consciousness for a time. You really have to put off the cell phone, put it away, turn it off. For most of us, most of the time, that's hard work. When people pray, I think they're addressing how they wish the powers that be in the universe cared for them. Or when we're not sure that the cosmic powers do care, doing our best to get in touch with what humanity's benevolent motives in the universe hopefully are. I don't pray to Jesus because I believe he taught humanity that we are all children of creation, all children of the powers of the universe. I don't pray to a judgmental God, but to creation, because I think it's our job as people to get in touch with creation's motives rather than creation's job to take care of us. Of course, there's many times, like most everyone else, when I wish that the universe does care and is taking care of me or my intimates or my congregation or my humanity or the good earth. But I don't know for sure. But hope springs eternal, or we don't continue living. So I urge you to find at least 15 minutes each day to meditate, to be spiritual alone without any external devices besides your own feelings and consciousness. And I urge you to pray whenever you need to do so, and to continue praying until you again find the hope and grace that life gives us all when we are paying attention. And quite a few of us think we've outgrown things from our religious past. But then when faced with some kind of life trauma, we suddenly find ourselves, back in the 23rd Psalm, or back with the Lord's Prayer, or back with something else. And that's okay. It's okay. You're not being untrue to your true self. You need that right now. So do it. That's all right. I think grace, amazing grace, is what we are given by life, by creation. While I think we are redeemed through those kind, generous, responsible actions that we give back to life. I think most of the grace we give and receive are through the common daily practices of ordinary virtue the responsible people practice in their lives. Life has many miracles, but most of those miracles are not fabulous or not amazing. They're the generous and patient love of ordinary folks share with the people around them. And that can be just as true of your Southern Baptist neighbor as it can be of people in the Unitarian congregation. It really can be. How do we nurture our spiritual paths? We nurture our spiritual paths through a lifelong process of having experiences and striving to understand and use them. It's a learning process filled with trial and error from parents, family, friends, and neighbors through the things we hear, see, read, find out as we become educated, grow up, and become worldly. Daily, we use both our growing empirical scientific understanding to analyze our experiences, to develop rational concepts, and we use our growing intuitive, imaginative, mystical insights to guide our insights and actions. In the Sacramento larger Unitarian congregation that I served, there were a bunch of pretty hardcore kind of 1950s humanists. And there was a whole bunch of people who thought they didn't ever have a religious experience. What was a religious experience? That was a kind of a false thing. Well, the nice thing about being a minister is you really get to know people. So after a few years, I realized that every one of the 5 or 6, really hardcore humanists had each had a classical, mystical experience. And I even set up an adult education But they came and told about it, and their friends like, what, really? You were riding on your bicycle, and you were also up above your bicycle, floating along. All these different things, classical different experiences, right out of the mystical playbooks. So we all have them. Humanity's 21st century humanity has an increasingly shared perspective. We'd have to, given the realities around us. Allow us to communicate and cooperate, sharing scholarship, collaborating in scientific discoveries, using technologies, enjoying our creations, playing, singing, dancing, and listening to music, and healing our wounds. Most human beings realize that each of us has some of the truth, and no one has all of the truth. And quite a few of my experiences, both as a child and an adult, my life-changing experiences with people that a lot of their neighbors probably thought were people of no account, not worth their time. But they were to me. They taught me something. They showed me something by the way they acted that I have for the rest of my life. The trash man that I rode with to the dump on and his wagon. I was in love with the horse and the guy. He was from Eastern Europe. He was a simple guy. He had trouble speaking English a little bit. He didn't speak it right. But what a loving human being. And when people mistreated him, on his way to the dump, they wanted his service, but they wanted to underpay him and diss him. And he just took it all, and then he'd quietly say to him, well, in fact, there was one guy that wasn't going to pay him what he was owed. And the trash man quietly said, well, that's okay. You don't have to pay me, but I'm going to leave it on your lawn. And, he paid him the $1 more or whatever huge sum it was, right? The religious landscape is dramatically different than it was when most of us were born. Fewer than 47% of Americans now belong to a religious congregation. It was 70% in 1999. Half of Americans have changed their religion in the course of their lives, and 25% of marriages are interfaith unions. The United States is now the most religiously diverse nation on earth. If we Unitarian Universalists are seeking greater diversity and more members, reaching out to people that grew up from other religious traditions, backgrounds, and cultures is an obvious and necessary path. Billions of people throughout the globe are well educated by contemporary standards. Like most of us, combining flourishing ancestral roots with an increasingly shared global perspective. How could the world work if that wasn't true? Many of us still base part of our beliefs and practices on ancestral religious traditions, but millions of those in every faith also embrace contemporary understandings of reality and are accepting and tolerant of people very dissimilar from themselves, including many who are physicians and nurses, engineers and accountants, neighbors and colleagues. They too are living spiritual lives of integrity, conscience, and principle, like us, striving to do as we do, to transcend selfishness and greed, at least sometimes. They too have their own mystical experiences as well as their globally pervasive rational systems. The world is spiritually diverse. Of the 7 billion plus human beings, in excess of 2 billion are Christians. 1.2 billion of those are Roman Catholics. But the growth of Christianity is in the global south, not the global north. And I don't mean Texas, I mean global. 1 billion are non-religious by traditional standards, with most in China and other communist countries, but there are many in the U.S. and other Western nations, including people in every Unitarian Universalist congregation. 1.5 billion are Muslim, and 80% of them are Sunni Muslims. 1 billion are Hindus, most in India, but more than 3 million have ancestry from India living, and they are citizens of the United States, including our vice president. 500 million are primarily practitioners of indigenous ethnic faiths. 400 million of those are Chinese, about 400 million on earth are Buddhist. And more than 1% of Americans are Buddhist, if not in ancestry, in regular spiritual practices like me. 23 million are Sikhs, and 500,000 are US citizens, and one of their children is wishing to become our president. 14 million are Jews, and more than half of all Jews are US citizens. 1 million are Jains, and there is a melange of other syncretistic faiths like Unitarian Universalism. The mother of my children, now deceased, was herself the product of a mixed marriage with a Hindu father and a Jain mother. The two families had been good friends throughout their childhoods, vacationed together and all. But when the oldest son married the Jain girlfriend, the Hindu patriarch would not allow the family to attend the wedding. But he became a very successful engineer, and he paid for the college education of all his siblings. Madhavi became a Unitarian Universalist, but she never stopped being a Hindu or a Jain in her beliefs and practices. My home is now full of Hindu gods and goddesses. I find the Hindu view of God as the Brahman Atman, a combination of the universal powers that be, but also the elements in each of us that are divine, that are a combination of that within the universe's energy, evolution, and creativity. And I think that's my most useful divine image. My spiritual practices are significantly Buddhist, seeking to live with mindfulness, effective compassion, and an engaged but nonviolent struggle for justice. My philosophical stance is significantly Jain. For the Jains, for several thousand years, have realized that truth is inevitably probable or less probable, more probable or less probable, not certain, inevitably relative and transitory, and that every aspect of reality continues to evolve. Everything keeps changing. Taoism is the Chinese system for mysticism, and Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching is the preeminent text for spiritual naturalists. And many Unitarian Universalists, like myself, are also naturalists philosophically. We find the divine very much in nature. I've repeated Lao Tzu's admonition daily for more than half a century as the central guide of my life: creative endeavor without possession, action without aggression, development without domination. I never get through a day practicing it perfectly, but I'm going to keep on trying. Confucianism is Chinese humanism. Confucian's insights about social relationships provide many useful guides for humanist practices. Western humanists too often don't surmount their tendencies toward anarchistic libertarianism and materialistic egotism. So Taoism and Confucianism can help us, Western humanists and naturalists, become both more ecologically sensitive and more socially and organizationally effective. Japanese spirituality is an ancient history of syncretism, of putting religions together and things from other cultures, adopting much from the Chinese, from Buddhist thought, and combining them with their indigenous Shintoism, which sees the kami, the divine, in almost everything, down to the rock on the road. I love the Japanese concept of ame, A-M-A-E, their concept of mature, loving dependence upon others. It helps the Japanese become more other-centered instead of self-centered. A downside of our American striving for independence, individual independence, is that it's real easy to forget that we're so dependent on so many people, right? Who makes our clothes? You know, for most of us, particularly the males, who the heck cooks our food? You know, I mean, everything we do, it requires other people. And so I think a loving, mature, loving dependence is really a lot more realistic, the way we live and need. We need other people. We depend on them. And I love the Japanese aesthetic that realizes that the crooked cat, the aged woman or man, the comical, non-symmetrical, the seer or very landscapes others wouldn't think much of, are beautiful. I grew up in a little town in Kansas, and you can understand this, I think, as Northern Texans. I became a real expert on browns, because that's mostly what you see. I mean, I was so excited when I could see the ocean, or I could see, forests and all this. My goodness, all that green, it kind of blinded you at first, right? Coming from North Texas or from Kansas, I think. I try to live Judaism's intent to help to heal a broken world. Tikkun Olam implies that each of us has responsibilities not only to ourselves and our intimates, but we need to help to heal, repair, and improve the world. My Judaism is that of Baruch Spinoza, believing that people can be happy by learning to live rational lives, but need to make their reasoning, their appetites, and environments compatible. And because the habits of virtue take a lifetime of experimental learning. My Judaism is the Judaism of Martin Buber with his divine in the between. His God is a verb, and the thou of ourselves and others, like Socrates, the thou with the natural world, like Goethe, and the thou of our spirit's potential, like Jesus. My Judaism is a God worth arguing with. There's a wonderful story, High Holy Day story. Students are asking a rabbi, well, how do you really celebrate the Day of Atonement? And he says, well, go look at this tailor through the window. Don't let him know that you're there. Just watch quietly. Well, he takes down a great big book. And he says, these are all the things I've done against the world. And I'm trying to make up for that in the last year during the High Holy Days. And these are the things that I've done against God, and I'm trying to make up for those. I'm doing what I can about those. And I thought, this is amazing. Now, this is really the way to celebrate the Jewish High Holy Days. One kind of lags back and notices he takes out an even bigger book. And he says, now, God, these are the things that you've done against me and mine. But this is the time of forgiveness, and so I forgive you, L'chaim. I am not a Christian, but I try to be a Jesusian. I think I made up the word. Following his ethical messages and intents, but remembering that he really taught that all people are children of God. That the kind of relationship that he tried to practice, is something that we can all aspire to practice. And Dan's mother, right there, is one of those persons I love because she just lives that out in her life. And so many of you do. I don't know most of you, but Dan knows you, and he knows that you do. You're living this out in your lives. Like practitioners of Islam, I bow with my face on the floor at the beginning of my morning prayers. It's a lot harder to do now that I'm about to turn 80 than when I was 50 or 25. But it's important. I'm not bowing down to Muhammad. I'm not bowing down to Mecca. I'm bowing down to the fact that we are dependent upon the universe every moment. There isn't any choices about that. It's reality. You've got to deal with reality every moment. Islam's long history of allowing those under Islamic sovereignty to practice their own religions is much brighter history than those of the other Middle Eastern Western religions. Islam's admonition to give 2.5% of your wealth each year, that's your wealth, not what your taxable income is. 2.5% of your wealth each year to those in need outside of your intimate circle is a practice I think could become a model for the world. Their history of supporting our culture's scholarship, other cultures' scholarship is superior to many of our Western pretensions. Their practice of welcoming the stranger and being kind to the visitor are worthy practices for us all. My book is not an attempt to persuade you to practice spirituality as I do, or believe as I have come to believe. You have your own path. You're learning and evolving every day. But the book is meant to provide a guide to each of the world's historic religions, realizing that religions, like each of us, constantly evolve, learning and changing as they go, just as we learn and change as we go. If we wish to flourish in the 21st century, we need to become global citizens, embracing other religions and cultures, and not just expecting everyone will become just like us. Amen. And blessed be.